Message from China. In the shadows of an escalating global tension, a hidden threat looms over the United States, as a race against time begins with deadly consequences. In the darkness of a cold winter's night, two cargo ships undistinguished by size or shape, cut silently through the Pacific, carrying a deadly cargo. Beneath their decks, carefully concealed in reinforced steel containers, were two dirty bombs. The plan was simple. Quick. The bombs would be smuggled onto the shores of the United States, and the world would change forever. China had spent months preparing. The bombs had been assembled by shadowy figures within their government's military complex, using materials gathered from untraceable sources. The idea was not to cause immediate devastation, but to send a message: we can reach you anywhere. For many weeks, American intelligence had been aware of the two bombs. An informant, desperate for a better life, had slipped through the cracks of China's tightly controlled system. The intel was confirmed through intercepted communications and satellite imagery. The bombs were en route. The East Coast was their destination, somewhere between New York and Washington, D.C., where the largest population centers could be brought to their knees with one simple act of terror. The United States government had known this for some time. There had been meetings behind closed doors, hushed conversations in high-level rooms, and frantic calls between intelligence agencies. They tracked the ships as they cruised toward American waters, their movements monitored by a fleet of satellites, drones, and submarines. Radiation detectors were placed at key ports and coastlines, ready to scan for any unusual activity. Every moment felt like a race against time. But, as the cargo ships drew closer to U.S. shores, something went wrong. The last signal from one of the ships came from just outside the 12-mile territorial limit. The signal, weak and fragmented, suggested that the cargo had been unloaded somewhere in the vicinity, possibly into smaller boats. Then, nothing. The tracking devices, carefully placed inside the containers, were no longer transmitting. It had been a mistake. The U.S. government was left scrambling to respond, but the bombers were already ahead. It was as if the bombs had vanished into thin air. By the time the drones were deployed, equipped with radiation sensors, humming silently above the waves, the bombs were already long gone. The radiation readings were faint at first, then more distinct, like the whispers of something terrible just beyond the horizon. The drones scoured the East Coast, but they couldn't find the bombs. The search expanded into the cities, into suburban neighborhoods, but there was no sign of them. The sensors would ping briefly, then go dark, only to flare up again moments later in a different place. In the meantime, the American public was kept in the dark. Reports were spun as routine security procedures, and the government's top priority was keeping panic at bay. People walked the streets in a fog of unease, oblivious to the grave danger that was silently slipping closer to them. Days passed. No answers. No clues. The tension, palpable and thick in the air, settled heavily on Washington, D.C., which was preparing for the worst. The first bomb detonated without warning, in a forgotten corner of the city, a densely packed residential neighborhood. No one had expected it there, a place far from any governmental or military target, but that's where the first signal came in, a surge of radiation, thick and poisonous. By the time emergency services reached the site, the devastation was already too great. The shockwave collapsed buildings, and the plume of radioactive dust quickly spread across the city like a dying breath. Thousands died instantly. In the chaos, the second bomb remained undetected. The radiation would have been low at first, easily masked by the remnants of the first explosion, but it would have spread, slowly, through the city. It was too late by the time authorities could react. The second bomb went off at the heart of the nation's capital, decimating Washington, D.C., its vital institutions, and the lives of those who had thought themselves safe. Radiation lingered long after the dust settled, and the once vibrant city became a barren wasteland. The government's response was swift but futile. Attempts to contain the radiation were too little, too late. The American military scrambled to secure remaining coastal regions, but there were too many questions, too few answers. The smuggled bombs were only part of a larger, more insidious plan, a wake-up call to a nation that thought itself untouchable. The tragedy spread far beyond the explosion sites. The American economy, already fragile from internal strife, crumbled. The government, desperate to regain control, found itself fractured, torn between factions, and utterly incapable of functioning. Though they knew it was China, they were powerless to stop it. In China, there was no celebration. No victory march. Only a quiet acknowledgement of success, a chilling reminder of their power. The bombs had not been meant to destroy, but to send a message: we are the ones who decide the world's fate. And as the dust settled, as the radioactive winds whispered over the ruins, it became clear. The bombs weren't the worst of it. The worst was the slow, creeping realization that there was no way to prevent it from happening again. Not when the very world itself was beginning to burn.